sat in the sterile interrogation chamber aboard the Galactic Council's flagship, his four arms trembling as he faced the recording device. The wounds across his crystalline exoskeleton had begun to heal, but the mental scars from his encounter with humanity would never fade. The Council representatives leaned forward in their seats, their various alien forms unified in their desire to understand what had happened to the hegemony's most elite strike force. "Begin your testimony," commanded Admiral, her serpentine form coiled behind the curved desk. "Tell us everything about your encounter with the human military." His compound eyes clicked nervously as he gathered his thoughts. For cycles, the Galactic Council had dismissed humanity as a primitive species barely worthy of notice. Their technology seemed crude, their society chaotic, and their military tactics appeared laughably simple compared to the sophisticated warfare practiced by the elder races. The hegemony had been confident that subjugating Earth would take no more than a few solar rotations. How wrong they had been. "The humans," began, his voice crackling through his translator, "are not what we believed them to be. We thought we understood warfare. We thought our centuries of conquest had prepared us for any enemy. But humans fight differently than anyone else in the galaxy." The first sign that something was wrong came during the initial assault on Earth's moon. The hegemony fleet had approached Luna expecting token resistance from whatever primitive defense platforms the humans might have constructed. Instead, they found themselves facing something unprecedented in galactic warfare. Humans who refused to surrender even when defeat was certain. Had been part of the advance reconnaissance team that landed on the dark side of Luna. The human military installation there should have been easy to capture. Intelligence reports indicated it was a research facility with minimal defensive capabilities. But when the hegemony forces breached the outer perimeter, they discovered that the humans had turned their entire base into a weapon. "They had rigged explosives throughout the facility," explained, his memory still vivid with horror. "Not just to deny us access to their technology, but to take as many of us with them as possible. When our forces entered the main laboratory, the humans detonated charges that brought down half the structure. 67 of our warriors died in that collapse." But that wasn't the worst part. As the hegemony forces regrouped and prepared to secure the remaining sections of the base, they encountered something that challenged every assumption they had about civilized warfare. The surviving humans didn't retreat to a defensible position or attempt to negotiate. Instead, they launched suicide attacks with weapons that seemed designed more to inflict maximum psychological damage than tactical advantage. "One of their soldiers," continued, his voice growing quieter, "ran at our position carrying what their language calls a flamethrower. He was already wounded, bleeding from multiple projectile hits, but he kept coming. When our energy weapons finally brought him down, he was less than 3 meters from our defensive line. The flames from his weapon reached 2 of our squad members." Admiral's scales rippled with confusion. Surely this was an isolated incident? No rational species would waste soldiers in such a manner. His laugh was bitter and hollow. "That's what we thought too, but it wasn't isolated. It was standard human military doctrine." The hegemony's second mistake was assuming that Earth's divided nations would be unable to coordinate an effective defense. Their intelligence had identified over 200 separate political entities, each with their own military forces and conflicting interests. Any logical species would fracture under the pressure of invasion, with various factions attempting to negotiate separate peace agreements or betraying each other for favorable terms. Humans did the opposite. "Within hours of our arrival in Earth's orbital space," explained, "every human military force on the planet began working together. Nations that had been enemies for decades suddenly shared intelligence and coordinated attacks. Their leaders put aside territorial disputes and resource conflicts to focus entirely on resistance. The first major engagement occurred over the Pacific Ocean, where the hegemony's second wave attempted to establish air superiority. Human aircraft rose to meet them in numbers that all projections. The primitive jet engines and projectile weapons should have been no match for hegemony energy shields and plasma cannons. But humans had adapted their tactics in ways that shocked the alien commanders. Instead of engaging in traditional aerial combat, human pilots used their aircraft as guided missiles, ramming hegemony fighters and bombers even when their own weapons ran out of ammunition. Some human pilots continued fighting even after their aircraft suffered catastrophic damage, steering burning wrecks into hegemony formations. We shot down over 3,000 human aircraft that day, said. But they destroyed 47 of our fighters and 6 heavy bombers. The mathematics made no sense. Their loss ratio should have made continued resistance impossible, but more human aircraft kept appearing. The ground invasion began 3 days later, and that's when the hegemony discovered the true horror of fighting humans on their own territory. Every human settlement, no matter how small, had been transformed into a fortress. Civilians fought alongside soldiers, using improvised weapons and guerrilla tactics that turned every street into had been part of the assault on a human city called Sydney. Intelligence suggested it was primarily a civilian population center with minimal military value. The hegemony planned to capture it intact as a demonstration of their power, offering the human leadership an example of what would happen to other cities if they continued to resist. The battle lasted 18 days. They had turned every building into a sniper's nest, recalled. Every underground tunnel became a supply route for their resistance fighters. When we thought we had secured a sector, humans would emerge from sewers and basements to attack our supply convoys. The hegemony's advanced sensors and energy weapons should have given them an overwhelming advantage in urban combat. But humans had learned to use their own city against the invaders. They collapsed buildings to create flooded subway tunnels to force hegemony forces into kill zones, and used their knowledge of local geography to maintain communication and coordination even under heavy bombardment. On the 7th day of fighting, continued, I watched a human child, no more than 12 cycles old, lead a group of our soldiers into an ambush. She pretended to be lost and frightened, speaking their word, help, in broken hegemony common tongue. When my squad members moved to assist her, she triggered an explosive device hidden in her clothing. The horror in his voice was evident even through the translator. She knew she would die, but she also knew she would take enemy soldiers with her. A child, Admiral. Their young ones were willing to sacrifice themselves for victory. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of human warfare was their refusal to accept defeat even when victory was impossible. As the battle for Sydney dragged on, hegemony forces controlled most of the city's infrastructure. Human casualties mounted into the tens of thousands. Any rational species would have recognized the futility of continued resistance. Humans escalated instead. They began using weapons we didn't even know they possessed, explained. Chemical agents that ate through our protective gear, biological weapons that targeted our specific physiology. Some of their weapons seemed designed specifically to cause suffering rather than quick death. The turning point came when human forces detonated what their military called a tactical nuclear device in the city's financial district. The explosion vaporized 3 city blocks and killed thousands of their own civilians, along with 200 hegemony soldiers. They destroyed part of their own city, said in disbelief. They killed their own people to deny us a strategic position. When our commanders demanded an explanation through diplomatic channels, the human response was simple. We can rebuild cities, we cannot rebuild our freedom. Admiral exchanged glances with the other council members. The implications of testimony were staggering. If humans were willing to sacrifice their own population centers to resist occupation, traditional conquest strategies would be ineffective. Continue, she commanded. The siege of Sydney finally ended when human reinforcements arrived from across their continent. But instead of attempting to retake the city through conventional assault, they implemented what their military termed a scorched earth strategy. They cut off all power, water, and supply lines to the occupied areas while maintaining constant artillery bombardment from positions outside the city. Hegemony forces found themselves trapped in an urban wasteland, surrounded by a population that viewed death as preferable to surrender. Every day brought new attacks from resistance fighters who seemed to materialize from nowhere. Every night brought psychological warfare as humans broadcast messages in hegemony languages, describing in detail what would happen to any alien who fell into their hands. They had studied our physiology, explained. They knew exactly what would cause us pain, what would terrify us, what would break our morale. Their propaganda wasn't just threats of death. It was promises of prolonged suffering designed specifically for our psychology. The evacuation of Sydney came after the humans demonstrated their willingness to use even more devastating weapons. Intelligence reports suggested they were preparing to detonate a larger nuclear device that would irradiate the entire metropolitan area. Rather than lose an entire battle group to human fanaticism, Hegemony Command ordered a withdrawal. But the humans weren't finished with psychological warfare. As Hegemony transports lifted off from the ruined city, human aircraft appeared one final time. Instead of attacking the departing ships, they escorted them to the edge of Earth's atmosphere while broadcasting a message on all frequencies. The message was simple. Tell your leaders what happened here, tell them what happens to invaders on Earth, and tell them we're just getting started. Testimony continued for several more hours, describing engagement after engagement where humans displayed tactical innovation, strategic patience, and a willingness to accept casualties that all military logic. They fought in ways that violated every principle of civilized warfare, using weapons and tactics that prioritized enemy suffering over their own survival. By the time Admiral called for a recess, the council chambers had fallen silent. The implications of Secount were clear. Humanity represented a threat unlike anything the galaxy had encountered before, not because of their technology or their numbers, but because of their fundamental approach to conflict. As the alien representatives filed out of the chamber, each lost in their own thoughts, none of them noticed the small recording device hidden among the council's equipment. Nor did they realize that every word of testimony was being transmitted to a human intelligence vessel hidden in the asteroid belt beyond the system's edge. Humanity had learned long ago that information was the most powerful weapon of all, and now they knew exactly what their enemies thought of them. The war was about to enter a new phase, and humans intended to exceed every terrifying expectation their enemies had developed. After all, if the galaxy was going to fear humanity's approach to warfare, they might as well give them something truly worth fearing. 3 standard cycles had passed since testimony, and the Galactic Council had made their decision. Despite the disturbing reports from Earth, they could not allow a single primitive species to dictate terms to the established galactic order. The Council vote was unanimous. Humanity would be contained through a comprehensive blockade until they agreed to integrate peacefully into galactic civilization. Admiral commanded the largest fleet ever assembled by the Council, with ships from 47 member species surrounding Earth's solar system. No human vessel would be allowed to leave their star system, and no supplies would be permitted to reach Earth. Eventually, the humans would be forced to surrender or face extinction through resource depletion. It was a civilized solution to an uncivilized problem, or so they believed. Sat in the medical bay aboard the flagship, his wounds finally healed but his memories still fresh. The Council had insisted he remain as an advisor, given his first-hand experience with human tactics. Now, monitoring the fleet's communications, he began to realize that his previous testimony had only scratched the surface of human adaptability. The blockade began efficiently. Council forces established monitoring stations at key points throughout the solar system, creating an impenetrable net around Earth and its colonies on Luna and Mars. Automated sensors tracked every object larger than a shuttle, while patrol squadrons maintained constant surveillance of all major shipping routes. For the first month, everything proceeded according to plan. Human commercial traffic came to a complete halt. Their orbital manufacturing stations went dark one by one as supply shipments ceased. Intelligence reports suggested that Earth's economy was collapsing under the pressure of isolation. Then the humans began to adapt. "Admiral," reported Commander L from his station aboard the sensor platform near Jupiter, "we're detecting unusual energy signatures from the asteroid belt. It appears the humans are conducting mining operations." His response was dismissive. "Let them gather rocks. Without access to galactic markets, their mining efforts are meaningless." But felt a growing sense of unease. During his time fighting humans, he had learned to recognize their patterns. They never wasted effort on meaningless activities. If humans were mining asteroids during a blockade, they had a plan. The answer came 2 weeks later when the first human asteroid ship appeared near the blockade perimeter. The vessel was clearly improvised, built from mining equipment and cargo haulers welded together in what appeared to be a desperate attempt to break through Council lines. Patrol Squadron 7 moved to intercept, confident that a single converted mining ship posed no threat to their formation. The asteroid ship detonated when the patrol squadron was still 50,000 kilometers away. The explosion was unlike anything in Council military databases. Instead of the focused energy release expected from conventional explosives, The blast created an expanding field of superheated plasma and debris that disabled 3 patrol ships and damaged 2 others. Emergency analysis revealed that humans had somehow converted the entire asteroid ship into a massive improvised weapon. "They turned a mining vessel into a bomb," reported Chief Science Officer Hun. "The explosion was triggered by destabilizing the ship's reactor while simultaneously detonating stockpiled mining charges. The debris field contained traces of radioactive materials that suggest they were using the asteroid ship to transport nuclear waste." Admiral reviewed the tactical reports with growing concern. The loss of patrol squadron effectiveness was troubling, but more disturbing was the implication that humans were developing new weapons specifically designed to counter Council tactics. Over the following days, more asteroid ships appeared throughout the blockade perimeter. Some were intercepted before they could detonate, but others succeeded in damaging or destroying Council vessels. Each attack taught the humans something new about Council defensive capabilities, and each subsequent assault incorporated those lessons. Watch the tactical displays with mounting horror. "Admiral, I recommend we pull back the patrol squadrons and maintain the blockade from long-range positions." "Absolutely not," replied. "We cannot allow a few improvised weapons to dictate our strategy, increase patrol frequency, and establish overlapping coverage zones. The humans will exhaust their supply of converted ships soon enough." But humans weren't just using converted civilian vessels. Intelligence reports began documenting the appearance of purpose-built human warships emerging from hidden construction facilities throughout the asteroid belt. These vessels incorporated technology that shouldn't have existed in human databases, suggesting that they had been studying captured Council equipment and reverse engineering advanced systems. The first major engagement occurred near Saturn's rings when Patrol Squadron 12 encountered a group of human vessels conducting what appeared to be a supply run between hidden asteroid bases. The squadron commander, confident in his numerical and technological superiority, moved to intercept and capture the human ships intact. The human vessels scattered immediately, using Saturn's rings for cover while transmitting what seemed to be distress signals. Council forces pursued, expecting to capture the fleeing ships within hours. Instead, they flew into a carefully prepared ambush zone where humans had positioned weapons platforms throughout the ring system. "The humans had been preparing this trap for weeks," explained to the Council investigators who arrived to examine the wreckage. "They studied our patrol patterns and identified the most likely pursuit routes. Then they seeded those areas with remotely activated weapons." Patrol Squadron 12 suffered 60% casualties in the engagement. More disturbing than the losses was the discovery that human weapons platforms had been constructed using a combination of captured Council technology and improvised human engineering. The resulting hybrid systems were crude but effective, demonstrating an adaptability that troubled Council strategists. But the real shock came when analysis teams examined the wreckage of destroyed human positions. Instead of the expected military personnel, they found evidence that many of the weapon platforms had been operated by human civilians. Scientists, engineers, even children had been manning combat positions against Council forces. "Their entire population is participating in the resistance," reported Intelligence Coordinator Iran. "We're not fighting a military force. We're fighting an entire species that has dedicated itself to warfare." Admiral struggled to comprehend the implications. In every previous conflict, the Council had dealt with organized military structures that could be negotiated with or defeated through conventional strategy. But humans had apparently transformed their entire civilization into a military apparatus designed specifically to resist galactic authority. The situation deteriorated further when human forces began targeting Council supply lines. The blockade fleet required regular resupply missions from Council territory, traveling along established hyperspace routes that had been considered secure for centuries. Humans somehow identified these routes and began launching attacks on Council logistics convoys. "How are they tracking our supply ships?" demanded during an emergency strategy meeting. "Human technology shouldn't be capable of monitoring hyperspace traffic." The answer came from an unexpected source. Commanderate of the Intelligence Division had been analyzing captured human equipment when she made a disturbing discovery. Humans weren't using advanced technology to track Council movements. They were using mathematics. "They've calculated our most efficient supply routes," she explained. "Using basic physics and logistics modeling, they determined where our convoys would emerge from hyperspace. Then they positioned ambush forces at those coordinates." The implications were staggering. Humans had used computational analysis to predict Council strategy more accurately than sophisticated intelligence systems. They were fighting an enemy that could anticipate their movements using nothing more than mathematical models and logical reasoning. Worse yet, human attacks on supply convoys demonstrated the same fanatical determination that had characterized their ground combat. Human ships would ram Council vessels when their weapons failed. Human crews would detonate their own ships rather than allow capture. Some human vessels appeared to be designed specifically for suicide attacks, with minimal life support and maximum explosive payloads. The psychological effect on Council forces was severe. Patrol crews began requesting transfers to safer assignments. Some species representatives questioned whether the blockade was worth the casualties. A few member worlds even suggested that perhaps humanity should be left alone rather than risk continued losses. Admiral found herself facing a strategic nightmare. The blockade was supposed to force human surrender through economic pressure, but humans seemed capable of manufacturing weapons and supplies indefinitely using asteroid resources. Council forces were taking steady casualties while making no progress toward their objective. The situation reached a breaking point when humans launched their first major offensive against Council positions. A fleet of human vessels emerged simultaneously from concealed bases throughout the asteroid belt, targeting the monitoring stations that maintained the blockade network. The attack was coordinated across the entire solar system, striking 12 different Council positions within a 6-hour. Watch the tactical displays in amazement and terror. "Admiral, look at their coordination. They're treating the entire solar system as a single battlefield, timing their attacks to maximize psychological impact while minimizing their own losses." The human fleet consisted of vessels that classification. Some appeared to be converted cargo ships packed with explosives. Others were clearly military designs, but incorporated technology that seemed decades ahead of previous human capabilities. Most disturbing were the ships that appeared to be designed specifically to counter Council defensive systems. "They've been studying us," realized. "Every engagement, every patrol contact, every piece of wreckage we left behind. They've been learning how our technology works and designing counters to our advantages." The human offensive succeeded in destroying or damaging 8 monitoring stations before Council forces could mount an effective response. More importantly, the attack demonstrated that humans possess the capability to strike anywhere within their solar system with minimal warning. As Council forces regrouped and attempted to restore their monitoring network, Admiral faced an uncomfortable truth. The blockade wasn't containing humanity. It was teaching them advanced warfare techniques while giving them time to prepare for a prolonged conflict. Emergency communications with the Galactic Council resulted in heated debates among member species. Some advocated for immediate withdrawal, arguing that the costs of containing humanity exceeded any potential benefits. Others demanded escalation, insisting that Council authority could not be challenged by a primitive species. The decision came when humans transmitted a message to the Council fleet. Instead of negotiations or surrender terms, the message was a detailed analysis of Council military capabilities, including accurate assessments of fleet strength, weapon systems, and strategic weaknesses. The message concluded with a simple statement: "We know who you are, where you come from, and how to hurt you. Leave our system now or learn why the galaxy should fear humanity." The transmission included precise coordinates for the home systems of 12 Council member species, along with shipping schedules for civilian transports and the locations of undefended colonies. Somehow, humans had gathered intelligence on targets throughout Council space while supposedly trapped by the blockade. Admiral stared at the intelligence reports with growing dread. If humans could gather that level of information while surrounded by Council forces, what capabilities might they possess for offensive operations outside their own system? The answer came 72 hours later when simultaneous explosions destroyed Council supply depots in 3 different star systems. The attacks were clearly human in origin, demonstrating that their threats weren't mere posturing. Somehow, human forces had infiltrated deep into Council territory and established the capability to strike at will. As emergency sessions convened throughout Council space to address this unprecedented threat, Admiral realized that the blockade had failed in the most spectacular way possible. Instead of forcing human surrender, they had given humanity time to develop countermeasures and extend their reach throughout the galaxy. Its warnings about human adaptability had been prophetic, but even he hadn't anticipated the speed with which humans would transform from a defensive force into a galactic threat. As reports of additional attacks reached the fleet, one truth became undeniable. Humanity had declared war on the entire Galactic Council. And they were winning. 6 months after the failed blockade, found himself in an even more sterile chamber aboard what remained of the Council's emergency command center. The massive station, hidden in a nebula beyond the galactic rim, had once been considered the most secure facility in known space. Now it served as the last refuge for Council leadership, as humanity systematically dismantled their civilization. Admiral was gone, her flagship destroyed during the Battle of Station, along with 2/3 of the Council's primary fleet. The surviving members of the High Council had finally realized the magnitude of their error, but their belated understanding came far too late to prevent the catastrophe they had unleashed. "Begin the final testimony," commanded Counselor Prime Os, his ancient frame supported by life-sustaining equipment as he struggled to comprehend how the galaxy's oldest civilization faced extinction at the hands of a species they had dismissed as primitive. His multiple arms moved nervously as he accessed the data files that documented humanity's transformation from besieged defenders to galactic conquerors. The evidence painted a picture that challenged every assumption about warfare, technology, and the nature of civilization itself. "The humans didn't just defeat us," he began. "They evolved past us." The turning point had come when Council forces discovered that the human attacks on supply depots weren't isolated strikes by infiltration teams. Instead, humans had somehow developed faster-than-light travel capabilities that surpassed anything in Council databases. While Council ships required massive infrastructure and predictable hyperspace routes, human vessels could appear anywhere in the galaxy with minimal warning. "Their technology makes no sense," explained. "Our scientists have analyzed wreckage from human ships, and the principles behind their faster-than-light drives violate established physics. They're using methods that our greatest minds insist should be impossible." The implications were staggering. Council civilization had spent developing hyperspace technology that required enormous ships, massive energy expenditures, and carefully calculated jump points. Humans had apparently solved interstellar travel using approaches that Council science couldn't even comprehend, allowing small vessels to traverse galactic distances in days rather than weeks. But technological superiority alone couldn't explain the scope of humanity's success. In the months following the blockade's collapse, human forces had appeared in over 40 star systems simultaneously, targeting military installations, government facilities, and critical infrastructure with surgical precision. "They're not conquering territory," continued. "They're dismantling the foundations of Council power. Every attack targets something essential to our ability to function as a civilization." The pattern of human attacks revealed a terrifying level of strategic intelligence. Instead of attempting to occupy Council worlds, humans focused on destroying the systems that maintained galactic order. Communication networks went dark. Trade routes became impassable. Administrative centers suffered mysterious accidents that left them unable to coordinate responses. Most disturbing was the discovery that many attacks weren't carried out by human military forces at all. Intelligence reports suggested that humans had somehow convinced significant portions of various alien populations to rebel against Council authority. Entire species that had been loyal Council members for centuries were suddenly questioning the galactic government's legitimacy. "How did they accomplish this?" demanded Counselor Prime Os. Accessed another data file, this one containing intercepted human communications. "They told the truth about us. Every species that humans contacted received detailed documentation of Council policies, including classified information about resource extraction quotas, forced relocations, and the suppression of technological development in member worlds." The revelation struck the Council chamber like a physical blow. For Council leadership had maintained order through careful information control, ensuring that member species only understood their local circumstances rather than the broader patterns of galactic governance. Humans had shattered that control by providing a comprehensive view of Council operations to every species in their communication network. "They're using our own policies against us," explained. "Species that never questioned resource quotas suddenly understand how much wealth their worlds generate compared to what they're allowed to keep. Populations that accepted technological restrictions now realize they've been deliberately kept primitive to prevent them from developing independence." The psychological warfare was devastatingly effective because it relied entirely on factual information. Humans weren't spreading propaganda or false accusations. They were simply revealing the complete truth about Council governance to populations that had never been allowed to see the larger picture. The result was chaos throughout Council space. Some species demanded independence outright. Others negotiated new relationships with human representatives. A few actively joined human forces in attacks against Council installations. The galaxy-spanning civilization that had taken to construct was fragmenting within months. But the most terrifying aspect of humanity's campaign wasn't their military capability or their information warfare. It was their apparent immunity to retaliation. "We've tried everything," reported. "Direct military assault, economic pressure, diplomatic negotiation, even attempted genocide through biological weapons. Nothing works. Humans anticipate our strategies and develop countermeasures faster than we can implement new approaches." The failed biological warfare attempt had been particularly horrifying. Council scientists had developed a pathogen specifically designed to target human physiology, believing that a species-specific plague would force humanity to surrender rather than face extinction. The weapon had been deployed simultaneously across 12 human colonies. Human casualties were minimal. "They had vaccines," explained in disbelief. Somehow, humans had developed immunity to a biological weapon that was created specifically for their species. Their medical response was ready before our attack even began. Investigation revealed that humans had infiltrated Council biological research facilities and monitored weapon development programs for months. They knew about the planned attack and had prepared countermeasures while allowing Council forces to believe their operation remained secret. "They're always 3 steps ahead," continued. "Every plan we develop, every strategy we implement, they've already prepared responses. It's like fighting an enemy that can predict the future." The Council's final desperate gambit had been an attempt to negotiate directly with human leadership. If military force and covert operations couldn't stop humanity's expansion, perhaps diplomacy might achieve what warfare could not. A delegation of the galaxy's most experienced negotiators had traveled to Earth under a flag of truce, hoping to establish terms for coexistence. The human response had been educational. Instead of meeting with government leaders or military commanders, the Council delegation was received by a group of human children in what appeared to be a classroom setting. The youngsters, none older than 12 cycles, proceeded to deliver a comprehensive analysis of galactic civilization that demonstrated understanding exceeding the capabilities of Council intelligence services. The children knew everything, reported. Population statistics for every Council world, resource production data, military capabilities, historical conflicts. They discussed galactic politics with greater sophistication than our senior diplomats. The children's presentation concluded with a simple message. Humanity had no interest in joining galactic civilization as it currently existed, but they were willing to discuss alternatives. The terms they offered were non-negotiable: complete dissolution of the Council system, independence for all former member species, and human oversight of galactic affairs to prevent the re-establishment of oppressive governmental structures. "They want to destroy everything we've built," said Counselor Primos. "No," corrected. "They want to free everyone we've controlled." The distinction was crucial. Humans weren't seeking to establish their own galactic empire. Instead, they appeared committed to dismantling all forms of centralized authority that might threaten individual species' autonomy. Every former Council world that accepted human terms was granted complete independence and technological assistance to develop their own defenses against future threats. The result was a galaxy-wide renaissance, as species finally gained access to technologies and resources that had been restricted for. Scientific advancement accelerated exponentially. Interstellar trade flourished under voluntary agreements rather than mandatory quotas. Art, culture, and philosophy experienced unprecedented development as populations were freed from Council social controls. "They've created a better galaxy," admitted reluctantly. "Every species that's accepted human terms reports improved living conditions, increased prosperity, and greater freedom than they experienced under Council rule." The irony was inescapable. Humanity, the species the Council had dismissed as primitive and chaotic, had proven capable of creating the peaceful, prosperous galactic community that Council propaganda claimed already existed. As concluded his testimony, emergency communications began flooding the command center's receivers. Reports arrived from across the galaxy documenting the final collapse of Council authority. The last loyal military units were surrendering rather than continue fighting an unwinnable war. Government officials were fleeing to remote systems rather than face judgment for their roles in maintaining oppressive policies. "What do we do now?" asked Counselor Primas. Checked his personal communication device and discovered a message from Earth. The transmission contained detailed instructions for peaceful surrender, including offers of amnesty for Council officials who cooperated with transitional governments and assistance in establishing new political structures based on voluntary cooperation rather than imposed authority. "We accept their terms," said simply, "because the alternative is extinction and because they've proven that their way is better than ours." The final Council session lasted only minutes. Representatives of the galaxy's former ruling class formally dissolved their government and accepted human terms for the transition to independence for all species. The decision was unanimous, not because they agreed with human policies, but because they finally understood the futility of resistance. As Council leaders prepared to return to their home worlds and face the consequences of their previous actions, remained behind to compile his complete testimony for historical archives. Future generations would need to understand how humanity had accomplished the impossible, creating peace through total war, achieving freedom through absolute victory, and transforming the galaxy by refusing to accept the established order. His final report contained a warning that echoed through the cosmic communications networks as species across the galaxy struggled to understand their new reality. Humanity had not been content to simply survive the Council's aggression. They had used the conflict as an opportunity to demonstrate that the entire foundation of galactic civilization was fundamentally flawed. "Never again," wrote, "should any species mistake human adaptability for primitive simplicity. They are not just warriors or conquerors or liberators. They are the galaxy's teachers, showing us what civilization could become if we have the courage to abandon the comfortable lies that have kept us enslaved to our own limitations." The age of the Galactic Council had ended. The age of humanity had begun. And across 1,000 worlds, species that had forgotten the meaning of freedom began to remember what it meant to choose their own destiny. In the end, the most terrifying truth about humans at war wasn't their weapons or their tactics or their willingness to sacrifice everything for victory. It was their absolute certainty that the war was worth fighting, and their unshakable conviction that the galaxy deserved something better than the Council could provide. They had been right,